Welcome back to DWeb Decoded, a podcast by Filecoin Foundation that explores the intersection of blockchain and the data economy. I'm your host, Aaron Stanley, and today we have part 2 of a special deep dive episode with GLIF CEO Jonathan Schwartz. In this episode, we get a behind-the-scenes look at how GLIF's liquid leasing protocol functions, and we discuss the value of these services being provided in a decentralized fashion. We also broaden out to discuss Jonathan's views on other DePIN use cases beyond Filecoin. Let's jump into part 2 of our conversation with Jonathan Schwartz. And I see you've rebranded yourself as DePIN Economist on Twitter, so I'm gonna throw a little bit of a curveball at you here. But it seems like with a lot of just DePIN projects generally, we've seen a lot of success in terms of like bootstrapping the network, right? Like offering a token reward to people to put their hardware to bootstrap supply of this network, whether it's storage hardware or GPUs or whatever it might be. But then actually getting people or getting clients to actually use this infrastructure, kind of getting the utilization rate up seems to be a lot more challenging, right? So it's been easier to get the supply bootstrap to the supply side than it has been the demand side. And people have tried like kind of all kinds of stuff to try to get that supply or to get that demand side boosted, right? And, with varying degrees of success. So I was hoping you could maybe just reflect on, even just given your experience in the Filecoin network and then, working on these other networks as well. What are some of the challenges here and what is it really going to take to maybe like kind of cross that adoption chasm for this particular vertical of crypto?
Oh, fantastic question. And demand in DePIN is a very popular hot topic. So I think that's a great one to discuss. I think there's a point in the conversation about DePIN where DePIN as a term becomes kind of counterproductive because DePIN means a lot of different things. And there's plenty of different models within DePIN. Some networks require staking, some require, So first, I think it's important to break down what I see are like two different types of DePIN networks. One is a Filecoin-like network where you have essentially a peer-to-peer marketplace of providers of a resource. So when I want to store data on Filecoin, I can choose one or more providers in that network to work with, right? And that's much different than the other type of network where the suppliers together are aggregating a resource that in aggregate create more value together. So that would be like a Hive mapper or a Helium, where the more supply you have, the more value is actually created in the like 1 + 1 = 3. Right. So actually, when we talk about bootstrapping supply and its effect on demand, it's very like those need to be talked about separately, because for a network that is, let's say, acquiring health data from many individuals across the world, the more data you get, the easier it is to sell that data to a buyer for more money, right? So like 100 gigabytes of health data, maybe you could sell for $1,000, and then 200 gigabytes, maybe $2,000, but 300 gigabytes, it starts to go up to 5,000 because now we can get better insights. We can train AIs. We can do so. Those types of networks where we're aggregating and the value is in the aggregation, I think let's set that aside for now. And let's talk about the peer-to-peer marketplaces. So one of the challenges that we had with Filecoin back in the early days is we had to build two things that were both hard to do. First, we had to build a blockchain because like the blockchains at that time were hypothetically insufficient. And whether that's true or not now is TBD. Could we have built Filecoin on Ethereum or a different blockchain? Maybe. There would have been plenty of other challenges there, but we decided to go with a blockchain where the original thesis for Filecoin, actually, like very, very back 2015, maybe 2016, is there's so much idle storage around the world, and Bitcoin, this guessing game, is spending so much energy on a useless game. Can we merge Bitcoin into a network that's actually more useful so that we're providing the Bitcoin ethos of a decentralized ledger, but in the process of securing it, we're doing useful work by storing data. So there was like this Venn diagram on Filecoin, which was like Bitcoin-like blockchain, proof of work with useful work. And can we merge those? And so that required us to build a blockchain. And in the early days, so to secure a blockchain, you need sufficient power, right? So for Filecoin, we had to bootstrap the network with a lot of supply because that was what was going to secure the network. And so early days Filecoin, I think there's like different chapters in the history of the network. Chapter one would be, can we make a blockchain? Right? Like, no, don't sell storage. This has nothing to do with storage even. Like, can you create a blockchain that instead of doing a random guessing game, you're proving that you hold files? And so I would say the first year, 2 years of Filecoin's history is just about building a blockchain rather than a storage network. And then, so we succeeded. We brought on an enormous amount of capacity into Filecoin in the early days, like huge amounts of capacity. Chapter two is, can we make use of that storage in an interesting way, or a way that's actually useful to end customers? And we kind of got halfway there, I would say, in that we've built mechanisms to bring real data into the network that's not just garbage data or zeros, but we haven't been good enough about getting end customers to actually pay for that data to be uploaded to Filecoin. And that's another challenge, right? So that is where we are now in chapter three, is can we create customers that will pay for the data to be put on Filecoin, rather than chapter one, capacity, chapter two, any useful data that's real, chapter three, paid data from customers. And so Filecoin's picture, because of its history, is a lot different than the picture of other DePIN networks, where there's more than enough layer one blockchains to build a DePIN network on. So you don't need to rebuild your blockchain. So you should basically take what Filecoin did and delete 2 years of its history, because you don't need to do that. So now we can get into this idea of like supply and demand for DePIN networks that didn't also have to be a layer one at the beginning. Because that's and this is where I'm saying DePIN is very broad, and now we're kind of getting into these pockets where things look a little different. So when you think about how Facebook came to market, right? Like, or social apps in general, it's very important that geographically they're constrained, right? So like when Facebook came out, it was just available on, I think it was Harvard, right? And then maybe they launched it on one other college campus, another college campus. And the reason for doing that is these localized places where you've created a real pleasant experience within that locality. If Facebook launched with, let's just get users on in random places, the value proposition becomes less interesting, because it's not as social near me. And I see some paradigms that are similar here, in that for DePIN, just like with GLIF, we have liquidity providers and we have storage providers. If one goes too big without the other, we become lopsided and the protocol doesn't work well. So you can't have way too many depositors with not enough storage providers, and vice versa. In DePIN, what we see is, at least a year ago, the meme coin markets are very optimistic. And so the quickest way to realize a lot of money in a DePIN network is to kind of create a meme. And how do you create a meme in a DePIN project? Well, you bootstrap the supply really, really fast. And because that's actually an easier thing to do in crypto than to build a product that people will pay to use. So I think what we're finding now is the aftermath of the meme coin economy influencing founders in DePIN to operate their projects like a meme coin, to get the attention that they need to get into exchanges, to get the money that they need to actually build the real thing over a long period of time. And what they find is, shit, we just created so much supply that we have so much overhang and we don't have nearly this much demand. And now we kind of shot ourselves in the foot. So what would have been better is to bootstrap both sides together, like create a local DePIN network. And when you run out of supply, go get more. And so I think that's like, we could keep talking about this, but I think that's generally my take here, is like, part of this is the context in which DePIN networks have been launched in the last couple of years, where meme coins have been really popular. And two is just the hardest part of this equation is building something that people want. And a lot of the times you don't need to bootstrap supply. You don't need to tap into the global idle resource capacity until you have demand to actually need it, So these networks pay a lot of money in their native token to bootstrap that supply. And of course, that's a cost. And eventually down the road, you pay for it. And if you don't have the demand to pay for it, then you put yourself in a hard position. We'll put it that way. Yeah.
No, thank you for that. That's really eloquent and very like. We're definitely gonna have to like clip this one up into a soundbite, because that was a very eloquent explanation of some of these problems. And I mean, just looking at the universe of different DePIN projects and use cases out there, right? I feel like people have been just, there's, you got to give people credit. There's a lot of really creative ideas for DePIN projects, whether it's like Hive Mapper, like you mentioned, like, just putting cameras on people's dashboards and letting them kind of, it's, kind of like a real time Google Maps type of thing with cameras, or it's like weather collection, or it's storage, or it's GPU and compute. Are there any of these out there, any of these resources out there, or these networks that are really maybe have like a more immediate kind of product market fit that like it actually makes sense? Like maybe, it makes more sense for me to purchase my compute power from one of these types of distributed GPU networks than from, an AWS or something, or some other provider. Like, are there any of these where obviously you're working at Filecoin, so you're probably maybe biased toward Filecoin, but like, are there any of these other types of networks that you see as like, wow, that's like a really great idea for this, if we could just kind of get that right equilibrium, like you were just discussing?
Yeah, I think that's where I'm at right now. That's like what a lot of my research, because I've been so embedded in the Filecoin ecosystem, I hadn't been paying that much attention to what other models are finding a lot of traction. It's also hard because in the marketing within crypto and Web3, you get a lot of things that you have to validate for yourself. And so what I hear about a network, I'm not sure is actually what's going on. So I'll have to get back to you on individual names. I'm going to give out free advertising before I've done my homework yet. But I think one area that looks especially interesting to me are energy DePIN networks. I think packaging up deployment of solar panels, for instance, and packaging up energy is a really, really interesting thesis. And I think it could work really well in the context of DePIN in a way that is very hard for any centralized competitor to replicate. So when you look at DePINs, again, I go back to like, as a builder, you can choose DePIN to build on because it's a hot topic, or you can land there because it was the right technology for what you were building. And for me, I think with decentralized energy capture and storage and resale, DePIN actually is predominantly the best way to do this, like decentralized retail distribution of solar and packaging. And so I think that's a really, really cool model that I've been pretty excited to dig deeper into.
No, very cool. Yeah. And I think you hit the nail on the head there. It's like, which of these, for which applications does it would providing the service or consuming the service in a decentralized manner actually be like superior than the centralized alternative? And I think, the jury is still kind of out for some of these other use cases. Like, is this like, it's an interesting concept, but is this actually going to be any better in the long run than just buying this from the centralized provider? Right.
Totally. Because this may be a contrarian take or unpopular opinion, but I think people conflate distributed and decentralized in a way that can be counterproductive for the industry. So AWS is highly distributed. Cloudflare, highly, highly distributed. Vercel, distributed. These are very distributed technologies that are pretty robust, right? Like I don't actually expect many DePIN networks to be more robust than the distributed storage that the centralized folks offer. The difference is in decentralized versus centralized is more in the governance and decision making of the networks and how they operate, and how you can kind of get locked into a model that then increases the price on you, or do things, don't let you get back your data because of some rule somewhere that doesn't apply to you. So there's other risks with using CeFi, centralized infrastructure players, but some of them are pretty good. And so for me, I love the idea of DePIN as a redundancy layer that's cheap and is less good UX in a lot of ways at the current the current framing of things and the current sort of maturity of products here, but in other ways much better UX if you can't get your data right. So I remember there was a team from Iran that had some code on their GitHub, and they got locked out of their GitHub for some reason. And they weren't bad people. This wasn't like an illegal project or something. And I don't know all the details, but they lost access to all their code. And for that, it's like, okay, that's where a centralized player really actually can become very harmful. And talk about good UX. It is pretty bad UX to get locked out of your code that you've been working on for a couple of years with no way to get back to it. So like, I think UX in DePIN systems is astronomically better than these centralized. I keep saying DeFi, and so I keep saying, because I'm so used to saying that, but like, I think it's also the context of the times, right? And it's the same thing with Bitcoin too, right now, where it's like when you have nation states that are potentially manipulating their currencies to get better deals in global trade wars. You look at something like Bitcoin, and now it passes the mom's test, because it's like, my mom gets this now. It's like, oh wait, no one can change how many Bitcoin there are or how fast they're printed or the monetary policy. It's like, no, like, and that becomes a really interesting, now the value proposition for Bitcoin becomes very clear for many people. And so it's weird because in decentralized systems, we kind of have to hope for bad situations to occur, because those situations create the context where these systems become very, very important. And the thing, like I was saying at the very beginning of this call, Juan Benet talking about long-term information structures in case of human extinction, right? He's preparing for human extinction. And so, like, of course, we don't want that to happen. But if it happens, these systems then shine, and they become like pretty much irreplaceable. And there's not much that's actually more important than them. So it's like 99% of the time, AWS is going to work well, but that 1% of the time, it's going to really hurt. And that's, I think that 1% is why we build. And again, Bitcoin was made because of the 2007 recession, right? That doesn't happen that often, but when it does, it's like, it becomes obvious why we have these things and why we care about them.
Yeah, it's a great point, right? And it's kind of like this old adage, like never let a good crisis go to waste, right? Like this is kind of, sometimes you need something bad to happen to motivate you to stimulate.
I've never heard that, but I love it.
Oh, it's more of like use more in like political context, I suppose. But it's kind of this idea that it's like you have this opportunity, you have this kind of like this brief Overton window where all of a sudden people are like, with the 2008 financial crisis, people are like, oh wow, like this whole system that we've grown up believing just works fine actually maybe doesn't, so maybe we need an alternative. And then a couple of years later things are working fine again, so there's not that urgency, but you need to kind of take advantage of that window. And maybe like kind of just pivoting back to Filecoin, we'll kind of land the plane to this conversation here, coming back to Filecoin and maybe just decentralized storage, even just more generally as a concept, right? And kind of tying that into some of what you were just saying about like, comments about AWS and like what's kind of the value proposition of some of these networks vis-a-vis centralized solutions. And, I would just love for you to maybe reflect on you've been in the trenches with Filecoin for so long, and you've kind of seen, the various chapters play out, chapters of the book. And, I feel like Filecoin is like, we're almost like kind of ahead of our time really in predicting, almost like like when we first started out, and when I first joined the foundation here, it was like, we were kind of like trying to solve problems that didn't quite exist yet, right? Like we didn't have ChatGPT, we didn't have all this AI coming in. People weren't even talking about like, well, how do I know my LLM models, training off of like proper data? Or this wasn't even a conversation that anybody was having. And I would love for you to maybe reflect on just like, how do you see maybe like the original value proposition of Filecoin like playing out over time? And do you think it's like stronger now? Do you think it's like evolved? Do you think it's, is it like, or is it maybe this is more of like, a niche thing, like, a redundancy thing that we were originally anticipating, where it's like, how is your kind of your view on just like, what's the role? Like, why does Filecoin need to exist? Like, how is that view evolved in your eyes?
Oh yeah, I love this question, and this is where you might have to cut me off if I start talking for too long. But first thing that comes to mind, so a few things come to mind. I think probably three. One is CIDs. Two is available storage around the world to like store the world's data. And three is programmable storage. So like, don't let me forget those. One is CIDs. So I think our audience here probably is familiar with CIDs, but I'll give this quick library analogy that Juan gave at some talk that to me has been super, super helpful, in that the current web today, when I type in HTTP google.com, I'm actually going to a location in the world to go fetch a document and bring it back to my web browser and display it to me. And when we use a library analogy, this would be like me recommending you a book. I don't tell you the title, the author, the number of pages, anything about that. I just tell you where it is. I'm like, it's actually in the New York Public Library, all the way upstairs, last shelf on the left. And there's so many clear issues with this. Like, what if you go and you pick up the wrong book that is just happens to be in the place that I thought it was? Worse, what if the librarian knows that you're coming and they're like, you're looking for the cookbook to cook this thing, but actually I'm going to replace that with a cookbook with poison, right? That's phishing. So you have all these issues with the current way the web works due to location-based content routing. And for a lot of the ways that works fine. We trust the web to work well and to recover. Like, we actually use vision and to validate what we're getting. So when I go to google.com, I look and I'm like, does this look like google.com? If it does, then I'm like, this is probably google.com. But again, like, when that happens to Facebook and it's just a different version of Facebook and I type my password in, now I'm hacked. And so that's like, the internet, the web is built on fragile content routing schemes, I would say. And this notion of multi-hashing, which is present in IPFS and Filecoin, is, when we use the library analogy, it's just me telling you what book I'm recommending you, and you go get it from wherever you want. And when you get it, because I told you what the book is based on its content, you can validate that it is what I told you to get. And even in the context of Filecoin and IPFS, you could actually go get every page of that book from a different library, construct it together, and know for sure that you have the book that I told you to get, which is really cool. And so, like, very futuristic versions of IPFS, when we were imagining this in like 2018, I was like ready to make a bet that like buffering in videos would no longer be a thing, because like, I don't have to go to, if I'm in New York, I don't have to travel to Arizona to get that video. I can go get it from my next door neighbor. Right. So that peer-to-peer linkage is really, really interesting. And so first, why does Filecoin exist? Well, IPFS supports multi-hashing, or CIDs, these content identifiers, but there's no baked in incentive mechanism to have people store them. So I have to run an IPFS node and keep that data populated for that to work. On Filecoin, there's a built-in token, the fill token, that is meant to represent, an incentive to store these CIDs. And that's, to me, a really interesting platform to build a more robust library on, per se. And so that really drew me to the ecosystem. I think so. That's thing one, is CIDs as a primitive, to me, are the thing that I'm most bullish on and most convinced in. And the incentive mechanisms around using them and storing them and retrieving them and computing over them are more opinionated things that we're actively working on at Filecoin. For instance, is it useful for CIDs to only be stored in very cold structures that would take a few hours to actually get back? Maybe it is useful, maybe it isn't useful, but that's just like one type of library, right? We're finding out, hey, in the days of AI, actually, like, cold storing CIDs is less helpful than hot storing them, so you can get them right away. And so this is kind of where we are now, is how do we build a better, more useful ecosystem that can provide services over CIDs and storage, retrieval, and compute? And so to me, that's why we exist, and the experiments that we're currently running. Have we figured it out yet at a large scale? I don't think so. I think we have a lot of work left to do in that department, but we're definitely getting closer. So that's thing one. And again, when we go back to the original Filecoin thesis, what was it? It was, okay, there's this thing called Bitcoin, and it's using all this energy, and all that energy that's using is not being put to anything productive. So Filecoin can do this by proving that you are storing CIDs. And now we all have a Bitcoin where I'm also storing CIDs and earning money for doing that, which is very interesting. But from what we're finding out is the useful work that we can put behind Filecoin as a blockchain and the work that we are needed to sell services as CIDs are actually a little bit different, right? So you can't use hot storage of CIDs to secure a layer one blockchain. And so that has created challenges for the Filecoin ecosystem. So thing one out of all those three things was the building a ecosystem for services around CIDs, and Filecoin Web Services is kind of like a direct stab, I think, at this. Thing two is tapping into the idle storage resources around the world. So I don't have the exact numbers off the top of my head, but there is more unused idle storage capacity around the world than than any individual like company could put together for storage. So if you could incentivize all the unused storage in the world, I believe you would have a very significant multiple over all the storage available at AWS and Google Cloud and Netflix. And so you would just wipe out, like you would have an enormous amount of storage. And in the age of AI, we're producing so much data, we don't have enough storage space to put it. So like literally Filecoin is it can exist just to be a vacuum for the world's data because it's expensive and there's actually not enough storage space to store that in existing centralized places. So that's thing two. Thing three is a little more experimental, but programmatic storage becomes a really interesting thing that we don't have in the centralized counterparts. So I am subject to the products that AWS offers me, and I am subject to their pricing, and I can't really opt into a different model very easily without just switching to a different AWS service. And again, if they decide to discontinue that service, or it's not super customizable, or I don't have the right calls that I need to program the relationships that I want for my, like, it becomes messy. So when you have smart contracts that can be used to actually invent new types of storage, you can invent new storage primitives that are not even possible to do in the centralized world. So for instance, one that we've probably both talked about is like a lighthouse like model where you stake some Filecoin alongside the data that you want to store, just like a miner would do on Filecoin. And what happens is that Filecoin goes into GLIF and earns rewards, and you use those rewards to continuously pay the storage providers to store this data. And when you're done, you just remove your stake, and eventually the storage providers will stop getting paid and they'll stop storing your data. This is not possible to do on Amazon. I have to pay for my data. I can't just lock up collateral and get that for free over time. Like that is just one example of a new type of primitive that you can only get in a programmatic environment that is also linked with programmatic money and DeFi services. So you have these like composable primitives that you can piece together in a trustless and atomic environment that you can't get from AWS. So those are the, I'd say, the top three that come to mind.
No, I love that. I love that. Thank you for all those. That's really helpful explanations, and it's great seeing your vantage point on these. And yeah, I think like all three of these have really kind of proven themselves out over time, right? Over the the decade or so since Filecoin was first imagined as an idea until now. The three of these ideas have really kind of withstood the test of time. Maybe so running up on time here, but I wanted to just to close out, I wanted to ask you about you guys just did an airdrop recently. You have a token that's live now. Maybe talk a bit about that. What was that process like, and what's the utility of that token?
Absolutely. So the way that we've been thinking about tokens is very much akin to how an airline thinks of airline miles, or Chipotle thinks of Chipotle rewards. These, and Chipotle is a very American thing, but any loyalty program where you like the actual product, you're using it, and in the process of using it, you gain points, which then you can use to get products from that same business. That's exactly what we're trying to replicate. So the thing that the airdrop did was imagine if Chipotle, or let's use airline miles, which are probably more recognized globally. Imagine if you were flying with one airline for 2 years, and 2 years later, they decided to introduce a loyalty program. What GLIF did is just say, hey, we're going to backdate all the flights that you took and give you points, as if that point program had been born on day one. So that is essentially the GLIF airdrop, is a retroactive distribution of our loyalty program. And the next thing in the pipeline there are to actually build the products that you can spend the tokens on. So what that is in the airline is a flight, right? Like I can actually spend my airline miles on a trip. And so that is what GLIF is in the business of building now, is different products that will link in directly with the protocol and the protocols that we support, the different DePIN networks, so that our customers, both on the liquidity providing side and the resource hardware providing side, they can actually get benefits from the protocol using their tokens. And that's something that to us is quite new, because generally you see different models in DePIN and DeFi, and this is a little bit different. So I'm really excited to try out these experiments. But ultimately, the thing that we love about it is it gives us a very clear indicator of how well we're doing. So if you are a token holder and you're not willing to use those tokens to buy any product that we're offering, then our products are not good enough. So like it gives us it does not leave us a lot of blind spots to hide and try and create funny, crypto financial engineering primitives to make this token do things that it wouldn't normally be doing. So that's kind of how we see it. Is it's really a tool for our loyal customers to just reinvest in the ecosystem and continue to have a good, enjoyable experience here.
Very cool. Very cool. Congratulations on that launch. So you guys got some good coverage of that, and folks seem pretty excited about it, which is cool. And then maybe to close out here, I'll just give you maybe, if you want, if there's anything else you want to say about just kind of like your roadmap moving ahead, whether it be products or fundraising or anything else kind of in the works that we should be looking out for over the rest of 2025 here.
Absolutely. Well, I think we're back in a research and learning phase. So if you are someone who's a Filecoin token holder who's also interested in other DePIN networks, as well as a Filecoin storage provider that's interested or working and contributing resources to other storage networks, we'd love to hear you, or other DePIN networks. We'd love to hear from you and hear what problems you're having. In terms of our roadmap, like I said, we're primarily focused on three things. One is basically taking our core model, this stake capital market, and applying it to different DePIN networks. That's model one. Model two is these new infrastructure financing models, which are like stable coin pools. And three are the products that you can get with our tokens. And definitely give us a follow on Twitter at GLIF.io, or follow me as well. I know I've changed my name to DePIN Economist because I've been trying to talk more and get out more. So this is a very timely interview. And thanks again for the invite. But definitely just follow us because we keep updating the community a lot, and we try not to think too far ahead. The world changes so rapidly, and so our plans do at times as well. And we're always adjusting and shifting plans.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Jonathan, for your time. Really appreciated the conversation here, and it's great learning more about your story, as well as just the really fabulous insights you have just from like many years just in the trenches, like building out Filecoin, building out tooling, just being a really kind of core contributor to the community. So on behalf of everyone at the foundation and the Filecoin community, just thank you for all the work you've done over the years, and wishing you a lot of success here in the months and years to come with GLIF. And so appreciate your time, and thanks everyone for watching, and we will see you next time on DWeb Decoded.
Thank you. And thanks for your support.